Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Tiffany and I work for the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. I'm the Director of Ecological Farming at CAF, and our basic goal is really to work with farmers to provide good information, resources, research, and opportunities to connect around key healthy soils practices like cover crops. One of the ways we do that is normally holding field days at our different trial sites that are mostly in the Sacramento Valley. But in these times, as we all know, for right now at least, that's a little difficult. So we have been hosting virtual field days, and that's what brings us together today. And just a couple housekeeping notes as we get started here. Please go ahead and add in questions to the Q&A box. You'll see a little icon for Q&A at the bottom of your screen if you put your mouse down there, and you can go ahead and enter questions in that box as people are speaking, and we will go ahead and have a question and answer session after all the speakers have presented, and hopefully get some good dialogue going. If you have concerns or questions related to sort of any technical difficulties, things like that, please go ahead and put those in the chat. So we'll put questions about content, about cover crops and whatnot in the Q&A, and any kind of other sort of logistical issues, if you could drop those in the chat, and that way we can keep them straight. And let's see, just to kind of let you all know, so this particular virtual field day is part of our Healthy Soils program demonstration grant that we received from California Climate Investments. And we currently have cover crop trials at a few different sites in Sacramento Valley, a couple up in Colusa. We have one in Solano, one in Merced County, actually. And I think that about sums it up. But yeah, it's part of a project we're doing. We're working with different growers to try different kinds of cover crops in different nut orchards. Some of them are tilled and some of them are no-tilled. Some are on drip, some are on sprinkler. And today we wanted to have a discussion with Tom Johnson from Kamprath Seeds, who is otherwise known as the cover crop doctor, as well as Wendy Rash from NRCS and Sean McNamara, who's a grower in Winters, California, about seed selection specifically. There's a lot that goes into choosing a cover crop and deciding, what to try out in a given year, given your cropping system, and they're going to go into a lot of the different options around that. And our hope is that, you can go ahead and take that information, apply it to your cropping system and your goals, and still have time to order seed to plant this fall. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom Johnson of Kamprath Seeds. And again, please go ahead and feel free to add in questions, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the meeting, or towards the end of the meeting. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Emily. Or Sarah, I'm sorry. Yeah, already this morning. Anyways, as I've been introduced, my name's Tom Johnson. I work for Kamprath Seed Company, which is one of the major cover crop seed suppliers in California. As a wholesale company, we work through our dealers. So if you have a relationship with a chemical company retailer or a seed company, we probably work with them. So you can take this advice and talk to your field rep, and if he doesn't know, he'll get back a hold of me. So I'm going to do this share screen thing here. Pick the right one and hit the slide thing. Come on. And then we down button here. So over the last 20 years dealing with this stuff, I've done a lot of field trials and a lot of field days, lot of shows and stuff like that. And I've got it boiled down to kind of a decision tree on how to decide what you want to plant or what you probably should plant. And if you walked up to me at a farm show and said, hey, I want to plant a cover crop, I'm going to ask you about 20 questions. And these are kind of the main ones of the whole thing. It's soil type, depth, chemistry, what's your infiltration like, what's your cropping pattern? Are you permanent? Are you rotational? What are you growing? Almonds, walnuts, prunes, what have you? Where are you located at? What's your climate? How much rain you normally get? Exposure and slope has probably a little more to do with vineyards, but still. And then we get kind of down in here to the bottom down here. It's, you know, other things that sometimes get passed up is, okay, what have you got available to plant? Can you find someone to plant it? Or are you going to be out there with belly buster on the back of the tractor? And then the management and philosophy and expertise. In other words, are you doing it because somebody told you you had to, or are you doing it because you think it's the right thing? And can you grow an annual crop in your trees? Let's see. So then we go to diagnose the problem. Deciding what to use isn't so easy. Like I said, what's the crop? And then is it mature or young? You sweep them up off the ground, or do you catch them with an apron? What's your soil type? Are you sandy or clay? Do you have impaired water infiltration? What are the potential erosion issues? What's your irrigation type? Is it drip only? If that's the case, you're farming two climates. You're farming irrigated agriculture and you're farming desert. So if you have the ability to cause germination, you have a lot more flexibility, but if you don't, you're going to have, that may affect what you decide to use. What's your climate? Are you frost prone? Is it extra windy? You know, there's those type of things. Do you fog every morning? Who knows? What are you trying to address? Water infiltration, nutrients, whatever. So, you know, those are a lot of things that you need to put on a piece of paper and figure out what you're going to do. So what's your best system to use? Are you going to use a plow down system or a reseeding system or a perennial sod system? And how are you going to manage it? Can you manage it? Can you mow it and incorporate it? Are you going to mow it only? Or are you going to mow it and let it lay there? At least have these in the back of your mind while you're thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to order my cover crop seed. What should I use? So my advice usually when somebody's starting out brand new, in other words, they've never done any of this or whatever, is start out slow and simple. And if you'd like, start out smaller. Do one block and learn how. You can make it as complicated as you want later, but I want you to be successful. There's no one magic bullet in a cover crop that'll do everything. So you need to prioritize what you want to get out of it, and then you match it to the system or type. And a lot of times we get these conflicting desires. Well, I want maximum nitrogen and organic matter, but there's no irrigation. We're not going to plant until Christmas, and we plan to kill it in January. Compost might be a better idea than trying to buy seed. Realize that it's not going to be an overnight evolution. We've been beating the crud out of our ground for 100 years or better. So we're starting to rebuild it now. Some people have been rebuilding for a long time. Some people are just starting out. We usually really don't see results in the trees or the vines until about the third year. And then you need to keep doing it. It's not like I can do it for 3 years and then I'm good for the next 25 years. So I've broken the types of cover crop down to 3 basic types. There's a plow down one, which makes a lot of organic matter. We plant it every year. It's usually big seed. So you're planting heavy. You're going to disc it up usually. Although there are some people that will mow it and just let it lay there. Then you have the annual reseeding ones. So they're lower growing. They make less organic matter. Done right, they come back on their own for several years. They take a little more finesse to get them established usually. And then there's perennial sod systems. And this picture is not a perennial sod. This is actually just a small grain cover crop in almond set. But a perennial sod works where you have a high water table or your sprinklers. You need access in the spring. There's reasons for it, but it's one of the last things I usually recommend. So then, okay, we've decided, okay, diagnose and decide. What's our biggest issue? What do we want to address? Is it water infiltration, nutrient management, erosion control? So then what's the best system to use for this? And unfortunately, I don't have the arrows coming in here and swoopy thingies, but such as it is. For water infiltration, brassica mixes and small grains in a plowdown system do probably the best bet in quick fix of water infiltration. They make massive root systems. That root system then dies with the top when it dies and leaves basically channels into the soil that if you're not tilling it, you're not creating a cutoff, and you have now a channel from the soil surface down into the subsoil. Over time, the perennial all grass sod systems will also help with water infiltration because of the flux in the roots growing out. You mow the tops, the roots die back, and then they grow back out again, approximately equal to each other. Nutrient management, and that means making nitrogen for your soil, sequestering nitrogen that you've already put down, freeing up phosphorus, freeing up maybe some other micronutrients through biological activity. So then that one fits a lot more of them. The mixed legume and grass plowdown system does a good job. Lots of food for the soil bugs. The brassica mix, which is mustards and radishes, do a real good job of keeping nitrogen at least up in the root zone, not letting it leach away. They have deep roots. They like to go after nitrogen. Small grains will do the same thing. If you're trying to make as much nitrogen potential, but you don't want a whole lot of organic matter, an all legume reseeding mix usually will fix a portion of what you need to have. Erosion control, whether you're on hilly ground or you're starting out and you have young trees on new ground or whatever, and that's the number one reason the NRCS will recommend doing a cover crop is erosion control. And cheap and easy small grains. Followed after that's the mixed legume and grass, which are annual reseeding, so it'd be kind of like what the range looks like all around you, or you can put in a perennial sod, provided you have a way to keep it alive and going. So, okay, what system we use? We want to affect water infiltration, so we want to physically change the soil. I talked about the drain holes that we're going to make. Then we have the surface residue. So biologically changing that soil, all of those things do that. Usually I would go with start out and say we had pulled out an almond orchard and we were putting in a new almond orchard and starting over again. I would usually put in a plowdown system for the first several years because you're still cultivating it, you're still getting the ground settled and everything else. Here's your chance to make up for a lot of damage that we've done. If you're in mature or just going into bearing systems, then yeah, you want less residue. You can't handle it to pick almonds up off the ground, but you still want to affect that. So again, we can go in with a small grain, mow it often, mow it early, but it still makes those roots. It'll help out on that type of thing. The surface residue in the summer is going to keep that soil cooler and keep moisture up near the surface a little while longer. So nutrient management, we want to add nitrogen. In other words, a net increase in soil nitrogen is expected after we done with our cover crop. Plowdown system of mixed legumes and grasses, an all legume annual reseeding, and there are still a few people that put an all legume perennial cover crop out there, which is white clover and strawberry clover. Makes a lot of ants, so on and so forth. It's like any perennial sod system. I want to make sure that's exactly what they want because you're going to have it for a long time. You're following something you've been putting in on for a long time, or you're actually doing it in row crop ground, and you've got a tomato system going out there or whatever that leaves a lot of nitrogen behind, but you don't want, and the water board will be looking at that, then you need something that's going to scavenge that nitrogen, keep it up in the system. So your brassica mixes, your small grains, your all grain perennial sod, but that's not going to fit that other one. The other nutrients, they're finding more and more as we get better and better at looking at what's alive in the soil, because that soil biology is actually what's making that stuff available for the plants and helping the plants pick it up. So anything that's going to make that soil biology better is probably going to help with that nutrient management. I'm not going to say you can make all your nitrogen for your crop out of your cover crop. In grapes you usually can, but in trees it's going to be a little more difficult. You still need to do your monitoring. You still need to know what your status is, all that for your crop. Erosion control, hilly terrain, young trees, you've got a lot more latitude to, you can disc it still. There's not that big a deal. So you can go in with that plow down system. You can use small grains. You can use annual seeding systems or whatever. Mature trees, you can't handle the residue that a plow down system that was just mowed and left on the surface is going to leave, where and the brassicas take a little more work. So we'll lean more often towards putting out a grass legume mix that will reseed itself with that type of thing, and there'll be less soil disturbance. In the riparian area, you're protecting your waterways from source point, non-point, and spray buffers. So in other words, grassing the waterways, grassing the roadsides, that type of stuff. Either using an annual system of grasses or legumes out there, covers the ground, keeps it in place, protects that waterway. Or if you have a way to water it, you can put a grass mix out there for turnaround, traction, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, what did I do? I'm done. Okay, with that type of thing. The one other point I want to point out is don't get caught up in growing the cover crop. It's a tool in your production practices. So if it's not doing what you want, you pick the wrong one, or it's just growing longer or bigger than you expected, mow it, kill it, stop it, start over again. I mean, it's not, don't get caught up in getting that stuff grown. So I think I'm done here. We'll close that out.
Thanks, Tom. That was great. Yeah, and just a reminder, we are recording the webinar. And so, you'll be able to look up this later, look this presentation up later. As Tom pointed out, there's a lot of factors that go into thinking about how to, choose a cover crop appropriate for your system. And one of the interesting things is that, there's a whole lot of information out there about, the different cover crop species and the benefits they can provide. But I think increasingly we're interested in information that's condensed in a way that can help us actually make a decision. And so we asked Wendy Rash from Natural Resources Conservation Service to go ahead and give us a walkthrough of one of the tools that's available, which is called the eVeg Guide. It's available through NRCS, and it can help actually guide your seed selection. And so Wendy's going to go ahead and talk to us a little bit about that. And she's going to, I think, give us a little walkthrough demo of this website that folks could use. And we'll be talking more about some other options later, but I think this will be a really interesting little demo. So why don't you go ahead, Wendy? And just a reminder, if you have questions for any of the panelists, we're going to get to them after everyone's spoken. So go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box. And you can take it away, Wendy.
Great, thanks. And thanks, Tom. Your presentation was the perfect introduction to using the eVeg Guide tool. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen share set up. If I can find the right, there we go. Okay, so first, this is a tool that was developed in a partnership with NRCS and with Cal Flora. And it's a tool that we use as our soil conservationists across the state are working with growers to implement cover crops and other practices that call for vegetation. It helps us to choose the right species for the area and for the practice that we're trying to implement. But you can find it, it's available to the public. What I've done here is just a Google search for NRCS Veg Guide, and it's the first thing that pops up here. So I'm just going to click into that. Because I use this a lot, it logged me in automatically. When you first get into this, it's going to ask you to sign in. So all you have to do is put in a username and password, and it's free. And you know, it just you just have to log in. So just so that you know, that's there. When it first pops up, you're going to see a map, and it's zoomed into the Southern San Joaquin Valley here. So I'm just going to grab the map. I'm going to move it up to where we are. I'm going to zoom it. It's all kind of the typical tools of a web map here. And the different colored regions that you see are the NRCS major land resource areas. So that's what's showing right here, major land resource areas. And that is just a climate grouping that we use to kind of describe where we're working, so that we're choosing species that are appropriate to the area. So I'm going to just zoom in here to northern Solano County. So I'm just gonna choose an area right here around Dixon. I'm just gonna click on the map. It puts a little crosshair on the map. Some of the cool things that you can see, you can change it from the map over to a satellite image. If you want to actually, you know, find your particular field, you can zoom it in further and actually find your field. When you're in here, you can look at the climate and soil profile, and it will pop up and tell you where you've got that crosshair. It'll give you some information about the data that it's using. So this helps if you see something here that you feel like is not quite right, you can move your point around so that it is closer to right. So it gives you a lot of those factors that Tom was talking about. What's your soil? What's your soil texture? Carbonates, pH, temperature regime, precipitation regime, all of those good things. So all of that's available here for you to look at. Okay, so once I've got my location, it's going to set that in the veg guide. And then I can go up here to search criteria. So I'm just going to click on search criteria. The map is still here. You can expand it again. You just click on map. The search criteria is where I choose the practice I want to use. So these are all NRCS jargon practices, okay? Cover crop's easy to find. It's right there at the top of the list. As you can see, there's a whole slew of other practices here that we work with growers on in different areas, and you're very much welcome to explore all of those. Today we're going to focus on cover crop. I'll talk a little bit about conservation cover in a minute as sort of a variation on cover crop. So I'm going to choose the cover crop option, and just FYI, for your information, in NRCS speak, cover crop is a non-cash crop that is intended to be established and destroyed within a single year. It's an annual recurring crop. Okay, so if you want to plant something that is more permanent, you would choose conservation cover for orchards and vineyards, or you would choose another practice if you want a planting that's going to be more permanent. So most of the species that you're going to see in here are annuals. Then we can go over to this drop down for purpose, okay? And this is exactly what Tom was talking about. What do you want your cover crop to do for you? Do you want it to increase organic matter? Do you want it to capture nutrients? Do you want it to fix nitrogen? Do you want it to reduce soil compaction? And the other half of that is improving infiltration. So if getting water into the ground is your main concern, you would choose this. All right, so I'm going to ask somebody to come off mute and tell me which one of these you want me to pick. Pretend I'm doing this for your farm. Which one of these do you want me to pick?
So since we're in webinar format, people
they can't.
But I'll just throw one in. How about reduce soil compaction?
All right, we'll go for reduced soil compaction. All right. So then we can choose a plant type. If we want to just see everything, don't check any of the boxes. If you just want grains or you just want legumes, then you would check one of these boxes and it will narrow your list down for you. If you want to narrow your list to only native plants, you can choose that. If you want to have a dual purpose cover crop and have it act as pollinator habitat, you can choose that. Okay, so I'm just gonna let it go. I'm just gonna see everything that we can see for our location. And it's not showing me. Okay, all right, so what you see is when I hit search, it's gonna give me a list of plants. So I've got 25 results here. I've got all sorts of different things. I've got oats. It's gonna tell me whether it's annual or perennial, whether it's introduced or native, the plant type, when it blooms, if that's important to you for pollinator habitat. It's gonna give me a seeding rate for a drilled seeding and for a broadcast seeding. It's gonna tell me how easy it is to grow. It's also going to give me some footnotes, and I'll get into those footnotes a little bit later. So then I can scroll through this, and if I'm a person who's experienced, or if I'm like Tom, he's got all this in his head, right? He could probably go through this list and pick out a nice mix for you. For some people, including myself, this is a little overwhelming. This is a lot. This is 25 species. There's a lot of variety here, from these huge biomass things like sorghum Sudan and bell beans, you know, all the way down to, you know, smaller, more delicate things, things that are warm season, like sun hemp and buckwheat, versus cool season. And you've got your brassicas in here too. So I'm like, oh, wow, this is a lot of variety, right? So I really like this mix option, okay? So there's also gonna be some mixes in here that you can look at. And even if you don't wanna pick one of these as exactly what you want, you can look at these as kind of a model, okay? So there's a green manure mix. So if I just click on that and I look at it, what's in there? Triticale, vetch, and mustard, okay? Oh gosh. My Zoom box is on top of that. So let me move that out of the way. There we go. Okay, so if I get rid of that, if I really am interested in breaking up heavy clay layers or something like that, look at the soil cracker mix. Let's see what's in there. Again, triticale, field pea, and radish. Okay, so that radish has that long taproot to help break up heavy layers down below. If I just want brassicas, I could look at this mustard and radish blend, okay? And it's gonna give you percentages of what's in this mix, and it's gonna give you seeding rates, okay? So these are good to look at, even if they're just as a model for developing the mix that you really want in your field. Again, early bird, I'm thinking that's probably like a quick establishment type of a mix, or something that comes, that blooms early in the year, so that you would be able to destroy it or get rid of it early in the season. So again, those are really great as a model. All right, if I go back to my select plants, so let's say that I've looked through there, I've kind of figured out what I want. What I can do is I can change these percentages, and I'm gonna make something super easy here. So I'm just gonna do 25% oats, 30% peas, and what else? Vetch. 50% vetch, something like that, something super easy. Okay, so I've picked my percentages. Whoops, that doesn't add up to 100, Wendy. Okay, so make sure it adds up to 100. Okay, and then we can ask it for a final report. So now it's created, this is my mix that I picked out, okay? This is where you can also look at these footnotes to make sure that these species are doing what you want and they're not doing anything that you don't want, okay? So there's a footnote number 2 here on winter pea. It says may be chemically toxic to livestock or wildlife. Okay, so if I'm planning to graze off this cover crop, maybe I want to think twice about how much pea is in this cover crop. Some of the other footnotes that you'll see, whether it's cool season or warm season, some notes on seeding rates, legumes that may require inoculation, species that have multiple varieties or cultivars. You may want to, instead of just doing a single cultivar, do multiples so that so that if some of them don't make it, others might. So that's what those footnotes will show you. There'll also be, there's just a whole variety of these footnotes. But the things about being toxic or hosting diseases or hosting plant pests that might harm your crop, those kind of notes you'll find here. And I just want to say a little bit about the individual plants in the mix. So when you're thinking about choosing your mix, and again, this is something that Tom can probably do in his head, but the rest of us need a little help. Think about seed size and your planting equipment. So you want to make sure that, you know, if you have a mix that's got really large seeds and really small seeds in there, how are you going to kind of make sure that you get all of those planted in kind of an even way that your planter can handle it. And then also the compatibility of the species that you're choosing. If you're planting a mix of grass and legumes, being aware that the grass is going to come up earlier than the legumes and might outcompete your legumes unless you're planning to mow those the top of that grass off to sort of release the legumes. So thinking about the compatibility of the species in your mix as well. All right, so once you've got your mix here, then you can export it. CSV will export it as like an Excel, like a spreadsheet. The RTF will export it as a word processor type document. So I can just click on that. It's gonna grind a little bit. I'm just gonna say, let's just put it in my download file. See, I was practicing, there's one already in here. And so then I'm gonna open that. Maybe soon, there we go. Gig speed, this is it guys. This is as fast as it gets. All right, so now I've got my mix report. It tells me where I am, that major land resource area. Area 17 was the location that I picked on the map. The practice that I picked, let me expand this a little bit so you can see it, is the cover crop. My purpose is soil compaction. It's got my common names. It's got my Latin names, okay, percent. Your seeding rates. So if you're drill seeding, this is your rate. If you're broadcast seeding, this is your rate for each of the components. And then your footnotes are here as well. So that is that. And I am going to go back to Veg Guide and show you just a couple other things. How am I doing on time? Am I okay?
You're doing right on time, Wendy.
Okay, great. So just to show you the conservation cover practice, because many of you are orchardists, conservation cover is intended to be a more long-term cover. So if you're doing either a reseeding cover or you're doing something that you want to be more permanent, like a sod type cover, you would choose this conservation cover instead of choosing cover crop. Again, you have your purposes. I'm just going to choose permanent cover in orchards and vineyards. As you can see, we use this conservation cover practice in other ways, like on a conservation reserve program where we're retiring land. We would use this, and we also have one for monarch habitat. So if you're interested in monarchs, you can come in and get a seed report for that. But if I choose permanent cover, I'm keeping all of, oh, there's that thing that didn't show up before. Okay. The constraints on elevation, climate, and soil. It wasn't showing up earlier, so I'll talk a little bit about that. So if I hit search, again, you're gonna see that seed, 27 results for plants. The constraints that are checked on are elevation, climate, soil is not checked. Ecoregion 4 is just a different way to think about the climate parameters. 40 miles means it's only choosing species that will be established within 40 miles of that pin point that I chose on the map. So I could turn that off. If I wanted to choose a wider variety, I can turn off this 40 miles and I can turn off ecoregion, and it'll bring back a wider variety For ETA zone is the evapotranspiration zone, so that's really more about water regime. So if I really want to stay within the water or precipitation regime where my dot is, I keep that clicked on. So you can, this is the default. You can change any of these for your search. And if you click on these, it'll give you a definition of what it's actually constraining for, so that you can understand what it means when you check the checkboxes. Okay, so if I look at these, you'll see, you see perennials in this list, right? You also see some annuals, but you see more perennials. You see some native plants. So these are intended to be more long-term, probably more costly types of seed mixes for a longer-term planting. All right, I think I've covered everything on my notes. The last slide that I wanted to put up for you is—
We've got one just quick question,
yes.
Wendy, for you about the guide itself. Someone was asking, what are the classifications in the NRCS map, and where's the satellite data coming from, and how is it updated? If you could kind of give us a little background there.
All right, let me put it back. Okay, let me go back to the map. The satellite data, I am not sure what year the satellite data is from, to tell you the truth. We do have data that is flown every few years by the Department of Agriculture, just aerial photos, aerial photography. It's most likely one of those coverages. And I'm gonna say it's probably fairly recent, but not like a Google map type of recent. So it's probably 2016, 2018 imagery is my guess. I'm not totally sure. There may be a way— oh, look, there's map data. Let's see. Let's see if it tells us anything. Oh, it's there. It's very hard to see. Oh, look at that. It is 2020 imagery. Huh. We're doing better than I thought. Let me see. What were the other questions? Did I capture the satellite question?
Yeah, I think that's good for now.
Okay. All right. Let me share one last thing with you, which is payment rates for our programs. So USDA has financial assistance programs for growers who want to try out a cover crop. We would come out to your farm, ranch, talk with you about what you want to do, go through the same conversation that we've gone through today. Where do you want to put the cover crop? What do you want the cover crop to do for you? What's your capability in terms of seeding equipment, in terms of management regime? Do you want to be mowing? Do you want to be plowing? What do you want to do? And we would come up with a plan for you, or with you, I should say. And then the payment rates that we can offer for different types of cover crops are here. So again, the cover crop is that annual, intended to be planted and terminated annually. So for a basic cover crop, a single species, you know, super simple, we're just trying it out kind of thing, $44.60 an acre. If you are a small scale grower, like a small scale vegetable crop type operation, and you've got 1 acre or less, we bump it up a little bit because just because the startup costs are kind of the same for even if it's a small acreage, right? Like seed cost is not your main cost at that point. If you go up to multiple species, the payment rate goes up a little bit. If you are buying all organic seed, your payment rate goes up a little bit. Conservation cover I threw in here. Again, it's not the cover crop practice, it's the conservation cover practice. And again, it's intended to be more of a long-term cover. And that's a bit of a higher payment rate because the seed may be a little bit more expensive and you may have to do a little bit more work to get that fully established. So those are what you would be expecting if you were to come to us looking for some financial help to get started with cover crops. That's all I've got.
Great. Thanks so much, Wendy. And thanks to folks that dropped questions in. We're gonna get to those in a little bit. So that was a great demo of a tool that can, you know, kind of assist us as we try to narrow down our options, and great information about the EQUIP program there to get some cost share opportunity. Next, I want to turn it over to Sean McNamara, who is a grower in Winters, California, growing walnuts in Solano County, as I mentioned, at Sierra Orchard. So I'll turn it over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Sarah. A lot of my notes have been covered here. That was an incredible wealth of information between Tom and Wendy's experience and the NRCS tool. I sure wish I had access to that tool 6 years ago when I was picking out my first cover crop on our family farm here. So what I think I'll do, I do have some slides that I'll go to in a second, but just I took some new notes and I'll try to apply for the folks and the growers attending this, kind of what I heard and give you a farm application of into both Tom and Wendy's system. So like you said, we're cropping walnuts. I'll kind of start with the big five, and then I'll go to some slides to give some photo evidence of what we're doing. So we're walnuts. We're in Winters, Solano County. That means as far as climate, we hope it doesn't rain on us when we're harvesting walnuts, but we need rain to water up cover crop in many cases. So for years it was this touch and go thing where we'd get the walnut harvest done, we'd wait for that first rain and try to seed as fast as possible and hope that it rained enough to germinate the seed. We've transitioned most of the orchards that were on drip or micro sprinkler to overhead irrigation, so we now have the ability to water up cover crop, which is huge and has changed our seed selection and ability. We're also, to give you a bit about our farm system and philosophy, we're organic, we're no-till, we're really interested in soil care. We practice silvopasture, which means that I remember as a kid climbing into 5-foot tall crops of bell beans, and we used to go for really big biomass cover crops, but since we've transitioned to no-till, we're really on the low biomass, lower stature cover crops now. That'll be reflected in the seed selection that I share with you later. Do I want to get into, our purposes. This is always a hard one for me because I want to try to do everything at once, but the most important things for cover crop for us are nitrogen fixation. We rely heavily on our cover crops for our fertility program. Reduce soil compaction, especially in between the rows where the equipment drives. And any ground that we've taken over or leased or has been put a new orchard in, there's going to be a lot of compaction we try to break up. Cover crops are really effective at breaking up that compaction. So we find that we can usually transition the cover crop after a couple of years after some of those compaction loosening things have done their work. And increasingly we're grazing these cover crops with sheep. So the cover crop has to have forage value. So, and sometimes those things work together, sometimes they conflict, but it is kind of a dance. And then diversity in our cover crops. Again, we used to do single species, maybe dual species cover crops. Over the years, we've added more and more in, tried to get pretty diverse in our cover crops, sometimes too diverse. And I want to get into some of the lessons learned in this presentation. And one of those is around, expensive seeds and diversity. If you can't get things to grow, they're not worth it. Doesn't matter if you've got 1 species or 15 species, which we've had. The things you can't get to grow are a total waste of money. So I'll talk more about those later. So let me share my screen. There we go. Great. So here's an orchard, and I've got my mouse. That's good. So you've got a couple different statures here. Not a great photo, but in this is probably about an 8 species mix. And I try to have, a mix of grasses, legumes, broadleafs, forbs. Again, lower stature, not huge biomass. This is probably February, so it could shoot off a bit more, but I'll get into our cover crop plow down in a minute here. But you've got some grasses, you've probably got subclovers, you've got a little flower right there, some broadleaves, probably some daikon, maybe some phacelia hiding, and then some mustards. I mean, in our area, we don't even plant mustards. They just come up on their own, but they're great. They're nematocidal, so we like them. Oh, I can't get to there we go. There's just a little zoomed in photo of it again. Diversity, richness of things, broadleaves, grasses, brassicas, forbs. And this on the right here is our orchard floor immediately after harvest. We might have done a quick irrigation in here to settle the dust a little bit. On the left, of course, is a no-till drill. We used to drill everything, but we've moved completely to broadcast. The broadcast takes care of some of those issues. If you have different seed sizes, it's a lot easier to just get things out on the ground. We did some trials between broadcasting and drilling and broadcasting at different times and different top treatments, and found that pound for pound, dollar for dollar, broadcasting works better. We can get a better stand out of it. We get, just a high recruitment of plants from broadcasting. So that's an antiquated photo, but just to show you kind of the ground we're working with, that we're seeding into, and to show you that we need the ground to be at this state to harvest walnuts off of. So even with our cover crops and grazing and some of the techniques I'll show you ongoing here, we can still get the ground to this shape with no-till by October 1st. These are our discs. This is our plow down. These are big groups of probably yearling lambs and maybe some ewes there. You can see them just chomping away at the mustard, the grass, everything. And we'll usually, we work with holistic animal management. So they're in small groups. They're moving through the orchards. In a good year, we can get them through the orchards 3 times between January and July 1 when they have to be off. Usually it's just 1 pass or 2, but they do a great job. This year we experimented with a roller crimper. So this is just an old roller that we're welding angle iron to. And over here is the result. We've since adjusted this to be more like the roller crimpers you see in the Midwest. And there's the Rodale Institute has a great schematic for making your own roller crimper. So ours now has these spiral bars on it that don't chop as much. They do a much better job. But this is when, if we don't get to something with the lambs, we can terminate it with the roller crimper. I might have a photo of this, and this is late March, and I might have a photo of this in May. We'll see. It's pretty cool to see. It looks like it's been mowed, just with some clovers coming up through it. These are some fun things in the cover crop. Again, we've worked a lot with compaction in our soils, so that's a daikon radish. They do what they're supposed to do, and we really, really like them. We're beginning to transition away from them because we've got our soils to where we want. We go out with a little compaction meter, just a stake with a tensiometer on it, and we can push different parts of the orchard and figure out how the compaction is doing. And we really have been able to break it up with these. These guys want to get mowed and then they rot from the base down. So this has been pulled up, but that radish right there will then rot in your soils and create this wonderful channel of life and moisture, and it has 300 pounds of PSI to break out the soil, break up clays. So just one of the examples, if we're going for compaction, we'll plant this. I think I want to get into a lesson learned that I wish I had known years ago. It's important to pay attention both to the percent seeds in your mix, the percent seeds by weight, versus the seeds per pound. So for instance, daikon radish has about 25,000 seeds per pound. Balanza clover has 500,000 seeds per pound. So if you're doing 2% daikon, 2% clover, you think it's the same thing when you get your mix printed out, but you're putting way more seeds of clover than daikon, and that'll be skewed when it all grows up. So as much as you can, pay attention to that. To give you an example, like I said, we're going for lower stature cover crops. One of my first years that my dad let me pick out the mix, the seed salesman wanted to put some orchard grass in. He said, oh, I'll just put 2% orchard grass in. Well, that was a lot of seeds per pound. And when it grew out, we had this 5-foot tall orchard grass, and we had drilled it that year, and it was a biennial or perennial. So it came up for the next 2 or 3 years in those drill marks. And it then became a management issue of trying to knock it back every year and trying to let the other good things that we had paid for grow up. So pay attention to seeds per pound and seeds per weight. So here's our mix this year, which we're excited about. It's diverse. These two things are really sheep feeders right here, alfalfa and sainfoin. We always like to throw in some clovers, a diversity of clovers that also grow up at different heights. And then I've been, again, like I said, nitrogen fixation is very important. So we've got some chickpea in there. We've got, I guess it's just a chickpea and clover. But I'm excited. Oh, we've got some garbanzo beans down here. This is a weird thing that I'm starting to do, is transition to legumes that can also serve humans in addition to animals. So, you know, when we're out there moving sheep fence or checking trees or doing irrigation or whatever, you know, in 2 hours of moving sheep fence, you can also pick 20 pounds of garbanzos for home. That's kind of fun. We'll see how that goes this year. Grasses, oats. Like I said, we've transitioned from the deep daikon radish to a smaller radish. The radishes, Nebraskas, mustards do really work well on the nematodes. You know, our area is totally plagued by nematodes, especially in the walnut and almond orchards, and our orchards have stayed really healthy from nematodes. These two down here, chicory and plantain, great plants, nutrient accumulators. They also have a deep taproot that can pull nutrients up from further down the soil profile, and they've got these big broad leaves, and they don't grow super tall, but they can then shed their leaves back on the soil and cycle nutrients. We're also hoping that they can clean up soils, and soils that have had too much copper or other compounds sprayed on them, that we can kind of clean them up with those. So, and this is my dad standing in some cover crop. And I'll just talk, I've got a couple lessons written down. So I spoke about the percent seeds by pound. And then, yeah, I made a note about expensive seeds. If you can't get them to grow, don't plant them. So, and a lot of these mixes, they have a lot of clovers. Well, clovers are pretty expensive, especially the ones with pretty names. And you might have a subclover that's this tall, another one that's 6 inches, and another one that's a foot. And we found that they're pretty hard to get established, especially broadcasting. And secondly, they're hard to get to reseed. A lot of them have a seed that develops at the very base of the plant where it touches the soil. So it's delicate, it's way down there. If it's too shaded out, or if it gets trampled, or doesn't get enough resources, it won't go to seed. So we took a couple years to figure out, okay, how do we get these things established, and how do we get them to reseed? And I remember a mix in 2017 that had 5 clovers in it. And I didn't see one come up. So it was a big waste of time and money, but we learned from that, and we figured out how to get them established in a better way. And we've got pretty good results in getting them to reseed now. But yeah, until you, like Tom said, you start small, start simpler, and add things in as you can. Phacelia is another one, beautiful plant, pollinator. We really like it. Nice broadleaf in the mix, but it could be hard to get established. It's not as vigorous as some of the other plants in the mix. If you've got a hairy vetch, it's going to be climbing all over it. It might drown it out. So adjusting seed percentages and timing might get the Phacelia in there. And another one is just to order early. I know that picking a mix can be overwhelming. These tools are super helpful, but we used to order in October and seed after harvest. Well, by that time, the seed companies don't have as much stock, and seed's going to be more expensive, supply and demand. So I was amazed when I got my mix together in June last year and called my seed rep. He said, "Oh yeah, we've got this," and the price was a fraction of what it had been in previous years. I'm like, well, hey, why is it so much cheaper? And why didn't you have to do any replacements for species I wanted? And he said, well, it's June. There's a lot more available right now. So get it in as early as you can. And if you have overhead irrigation, seed as early as you can. We used to seed everything after our walnut harvest. Since we're broadcasting, we've actually found that we can put the seed out either before harvest or after some of the harvester's gone through and before the pruning towers go through, and just the movement of people, machines, material through the orchards actually can pack that seed in, cover it with a layer of dust, leaf, grass, mulch, and then when we turn the water on right after harvest, we can start germinating that cover crop and get a jump on things. Do I have any more slides? I don't. That's kind of all I've got. So I think I'll turn it back to Sarah and to the question board.
Thanks so much, Sean. That was super helpful. Can you unshare your screen there?
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you. Those were great photos and really great lessons. And there's not a lot that can, I think that can stand in for just hearing some of the things different growers have learned over the years. And as we go through the questions, please also feel free to, if you would like to raise your hand in the webinar and ask the question yourself, that's fine too. But I think we're gonna go ahead and start out with just kind of going down the list here. And yeah, to start out, let's see here. Sorry, just getting things situated. To start out, we have a question from Emily for Tom. And the question is, when you talk to growers in perennial tree systems like almonds, what are the primary reasons why those growers are interested in growing cover crops? And do these growers come back to you year after year to expand their use of covers? So kind of what's your experience with almond growers specifically and the reasons they're growing cover crops?
I would say probably the number one reason is water infiltration. I'm in Manteca, so we have some sandy soils around here that will set up very tight, and their water infiltration goes down over time due to traffic and everything else going on out there. They're non-tillage, but just driving back and forth clogs that dirt up. Probably the second reason is for the IPM aspect that we can get out of some of these cover crops, where you have habitat for your beneficial insects if you manage it properly. And depending on their outlook on life, it's like that, which one's more important to them. Most of the time it's water infiltration. They'll always say they want nitrogen, but on the other hand, they're still going to put their commercial nitrogen on. So it's like, okay, well, you don't have to have all that. So you give them trees too much and they're going to get a little out of hand. Do they return? I unfortunately have to listen to the disasters all the time. So the guy that put out 5,000 acres and it didn't rain that year and it didn't grow, he's going to be a long time before he comes back, unfortunately. The 50-acre guy that worked great, he comes back next year if he planted something that he has to plant every year. Otherwise, we may or may not know where it goes. In the grapes, more often than not, we do hear back from them year after year. And a lot of those guys evolve basically from something simple to something more diverse. As John pointed out, over time, yeah, your situation changes. Okay, I took care of my infiltration problem. Now I've got bazillion bugs out there. I need to grow more bugs to eat the other bugs, or I got weeds growing up my yin yang or whatever. So those things happen. So those are kind of the primary reasons that they'll come in first is their neighbor's done it and they watched their neighbor for a couple of years and says, okay, well, that's cool. We'll try that. Almond growers are also interested in pollinator habitat. So we work with the Project APSM guys on that as well. So that's another reason. The returning part is a little hard to keep track of sometimes.
Thanks, Tom. We've also actually got Billy Sink on the webinar from Project APSM, who works with a lot of almond growers, and he said he had a couple things to add to the answer. Billy, I believe you're unmuted. If you want to go ahead and share.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I will provide a link and some info in that chat box for a cow share opportunity that allows people to get free or discounted cover crop seeds. I work for Project APSM. We're a honeybee research organization, but I manage the Seeds for Bees program. And in short, you apply online, you get $2,000 worth of free seed your first year and $1,000 worth of free seed your second year and free shipping for any year you sign up. Don't have a whole lot of new stuff to add just because there are the three speakers we've already heard from are really kind of hitting the mark, especially with water infiltration. The surveys of our program, we had 169 people participate last year that did over 10,000 acres of cover crops. And the number one reason is breaking up compacted soils. And I think programs like this, working with the NRCS, working with CAF, really, really help growers do something new, because it can be daunting. There's so many options. And, some numbers we have, 86% of the folks that participate in Seeds for Bees will include cover cropping in their future management plans. And that really is kind of what the heart of this program. Sure, it's providing providing nutrition for bees and soil health for the years that you participate, but it's about bringing that tool into the grower's toolbox and helping them realizing that sure, there are some risks and it's not going to be a cure-all, but if you have folks like Sarah, like Tom, like Wendy helping you out, we really can help you balance the risk and the benefit in a way that works best for you.
Thanks, Billy. That's super helpful. And we'll be happy to share some information about Billy's program. And someone did ask about contacts and information on the speakers. Just wanted to mention that following the webinar, probably tomorrow, once we get a recording link to the webinar, we're going to go ahead and send an email out to everyone with links to a lot of the resources we're talking about, as well as contact information. So be sure and keep an eye out for that email. It's going to have some great information in it. Let's go ahead and jump to the next question here. What are the pros and cons of using a crimp and roll system or roller crimper to terminate a cover crop? Do you know of growers in the area using roller crimper? I mean, I guess we now know of Sean, he's one. But yeah, if maybe Sean or Tom, either of you could comment on that, that'd be great.
Go ahead, Sean, you got more recent experience. Mine's all secondhand pretty much.
And this was our first year experimenting with it. We built that first prototype just with the material we had lying around to see if it worked, and we really liked the results. There's a ton of great research out of the Midwest happening around roller crimpers and their effectiveness. I mean, when I saw growers running a 20-foot roller crimper through a cornfield and on conventional corn that would have been Roundup the previous year, and terminating that to be able to have a cedar out back, just planting soy right into it, I was pretty sold. I don't know of I know there are other growers in California doing it. And I can only speak from my own experience that, you know, with the right roller crimper and weight and speed, it really does work in terminating the cover crop. And not only that, it lays down this beautiful thatch. And I'll dig for that picture and put it back up in a second just to show, you know, terminated cover crop thatch laying down with clovers coming back through it when you're in that cool to warm season transition. So really getting some good functions out of the roller crimper and out of the seed mix that you chose the previous year. So anyone's welcome to come out next spring and watch us do it. But yeah, we got on a little bit late this year too, because we were building the thing and then rebuilding the thing. So next year we'll have some better results for you.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, this is kind of an up and coming practice in terms of termination in California, but we'll definitely, I know there's Road Deal Institute is actually starting a farm here in California to do some research there. And as that becomes available, we'll be sharing that with folks. Our next question is asking about cover cropping, winter cover cropping in the southern San Joaquin Valley. We always get a question about what if I'm in the southern Central Valley and I want to plant cover crops? And I feel like Tom might have a couple things to say about that.
Throw me under the bus. Yeah, okay, cool. You're gonna, part of that decision tree that I have includes that climate thing, and Wendy pointed it out as well with the e-veg guide. If we took and clawed down on the map down to, say, Tulare and pinpointed a field there, the parameters are going to be different. And I would suspect that the choices are going to be slightly different as well, because part of that choosing or expressing what materials to use is going to be dependent on rainfall. Well, we go to Tulare and it's 6 inches of rain versus winters, which is 14 to 20. Some things are going to fall out because they just aren't necessarily going to grow there. So that tool in itself, and I had not played with that tool a whole lot. Now it's like, okay, well now that makes some good sense. Otherwise it's carry around in your head. The further south you go, basically you're looking at the earlier maturing materials you can get. And the reason that we're terminating a big bushy cover crop, we're going to terminate it at bloom, because that's about when it peaks out and being able to get rid of it at the same time. So if it starts early, then yeah, it took less water to do it that way. So rather than, well, actually we still use oats and common vetch and fava beans and peas and things like that in the South Valley, radishes and so on and so forth. It's just year to year, you're going to get a different reaction out of the whole thing. So the biomass production is going to be different in lower rainfall situations. I suspect if you continued to practice so, your soil starts to stabilize, I guess for want of a better word, and it utilizes that rainfall better, and you would probably see stuff growing better. But it's a long-term project, and a lot of people, you know, they're either just starting, or I don't get to talk to the ones that have been doing it for a long time. So it's choosing, instead of using oats, maybe we'd use barley because it's earlier to mature for the small grain, and not expect, and we'd look for an earlier maturing pea, for example, or something like that.
Thanks, Tom. And my sense is also is that if you are using the e-veg guide that Wendy was demonstrating, you know, that would also, those factors, your geographic location and the amount of rainfall you get are going to be factors in which cover crop species it's going to pull up as options for you. So that would be a good tool there. And we actually have a couple of questions for you, Wendy. One question that came in is when you were looking at when you were showing that online tool, there was some recommended NRCS mixes that came up, such as the green manure, the early bird. Someone was asking if those are the types of mixes that are commonly available on the shelf, or those are just sort of recommendations from NRCS. And I think the question is really, you know, how do you take the information you get from the NRCS tool about appropriate species and translate that into actually ordering seed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of those mixes started as either off-the-shelf mixes that we've seen and then we sort of evaluated and incorporated into the tool, or they started as a result of research projects. So if you looked at the green manure mixes, you would see things titled for BIOS or things titled for Napa vineyards, and those came out of research programs that developed different mixes for different applications. And I'm going to tag team with Tom here. So, I mean, I think there are still a lot of off the shelf mixes that can perform the functions that you want. I mean, one way you could go is sort of to reverse engineer it, right? You could go and ask Tom, hey, what are the mixes that are out there that I could just get that wouldn't have to be custom blended? Look at those and sort of also look at your recommendations from the veg guide and say, okay, it looks like these species are pretty similar, and you know, if the cost savings is worth it to you to just go with the off the shelf, then that works great. And then Tom can probably speak a little bit more to, you know, what's the process of doing a custom blend. Like if you pick out a seed mix the way that Sean does and send it to your supplier, you know, is there an additional cost for blending that?
Off the shelf per se, we deal with a bunch of different clients, and they all have kind of their own little lineup of mixes that they have. And again, they wouldn't be exactly what the e-veg does, for the mere reason that if you're using that tool, you're going in and saying what percentage of this and this, you're kind of fishing around. We can get something close, like, yeah, it'll probably do pretty much the same thing. As to a more diverse or complicated mix or whatever, there's usually no extra cost to it, other than some of the materials going into them are more expensive than, you know, peas are 50 cents a pound. Well, Phacelia is $6 a pound. Of course, on the other hand, you only put 1% Phacelia in because it's small, and you know, you don't need a whole lot of it. But that goes into the equation basically, and then, you know, your seed rep or whoever you're going to buy it from, if they're working with us and you want something custom, whether you developed it through the e-veg or you developed it through your consultant or whoever, I mean, they submit it to us, we run it through our calculator and say, okay, this is what it would cost X per pound to the dealer, let him deal with it after that. Some of the other seed companies are a little more direct about it, depending on the size of the operation. And they will go out and bid. Basically, the viticulturist or the tree guy says, well, I want this and this and this and this in it, and this percentage is, or what do you suggest? Mm-hmm. If we go through the what do you suggest, then we kind of pull out our memory and our experience and say, okay, well, you don't want to put 82% of this in there because that's all you'll see. You know, you don't put 20% mustard in with a bunch of other stuff, because, or with clovers or whatever, because all you'll see is the mustard. So that's where either that e-veg guide or experience comes into it. Says this is what we've seen over time. This will work for you. So you can do a custom mix, or you can basically look at a couple of different menus, I guess is a good way to put it, and say, okay, well, that's close to what I was looking for, or I'll try that first, and the next year you go, okay, well, we don't need to have this in it. It didn't show up, as Sean found out, you know, okay, well, it doesn't show up, why spend the money on it? Or it showed up the first couple of years, and now everything's kind of changed a little bit, and everything else grows faster than it does, so we don't need to include it in it. Or if we do, we will include it less.
Great. Yeah, it's a balancing act at the end of the day. And I think also a lot of what goes into it is just trying, you know, getting information from the experts, trying different things and seeing in your own field what's working and what's not. We have our next question here is, you know, relating specifically to planting. It says, how long are seeds viable in the soil once they're drilled, if we're trying to coordinate with winter rain? Anybody want to take that one? My impression is that seeds are viable for plenty of time for them to be hanging out in the soil, even if they're planted, you know, even a month before that first rain comes, they're still going to be viable, especially if they're a little bit covered. Did you want to chime in there, Sean?
Yeah, they're viable until they get eaten by turkeys or birds or someone.
Turkeys love peas, yes.
Yeah. Or until you know, get a little bit of rain, not enough to germinate it, and they germinate this big and then die out. But yeah, they're viable. Birds are my biggest concern. Picking up those seeds.
And that would depend on how deep it is and everything else. A lot of the grape growers in Lake County plant their cover crop before harvest. Ground's dry. There's nothing else going on. And they've been caught out a few too many times when it rained and they couldn't get out there and get their cover crop planted if they waited until after harvest. So if you were drilling it into moist soil, I'd be a little worried about it, especially if, like Sean pointed out, it was enough to get it started and it came up and it died because it ran out of moisture. But if it's dry, most of the time it's just going to sit there. Yeah, you lose some to birds, you lose some to ants and what have you, but for the most part, most of it's still going to be there when enough rain happens to make it come up.
Yeah, and so there's been a couple of questions, Sean, and I am also very curious about this. You mentioned that, you know, through learning, you guys were able to figure out how to get your clovers to establish and reseed. And there's a couple of people wanting to know how you did that. Could you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. And I want to elaborate on the drilling versus broadcasting. I said that we broadcast everything now. That's not necessarily my recommendation for, I'd say, drilling, especially if you're in ground that hasn't been cover crop. Drilling is probably the most dependable way to get it to at the right depth and covered by soil and seed soil contact and get it to germinate. I'm just going to share a screen really fast and go back to, oh shoot, not great at this. So this photo at the right, I mean, that right there, and the mushrooms are evidence of a 20-year no-till system, a lot of soil organic matter, a lot of duff and humus on top. So when we broadcast, it's going on to something pretty soft and it's pretty easy to get that seed soil contact. If you're on soil that's been land planed and been compacted, I would definitely drill it. And we started broadcasting with 5 acres. We did little blocks, and even when we started broadcasting, we would loosen up the soil and broadcast, and then pack it. And we've kind of evolved to this spot that we are where we can just broadcast it. I will stop sharing screen there. But on the clovers, yeah, I think, and so that program that we have, we broadcast before a lot of fall time machinery moves across the ground and fans and sweepers and whatnot, which was a risk that we took, and again, an experiment, but it seemed to work out pretty well. Again, I would say try it on a small area and see if it works for you. So on the clovers, the way we get them to reseed is timing the sheep and the grazing really specifically. You could probably also time your roller crimping really well. Like roller, if you space out the crimpers on the roller enough that it kills orchard grass but leaves a 9-foot gap that might let some clovers grow back up, it might thatch down the taller stuff and let those clovers they basically want more time in the spring, is what I've found. So with the sheep, we either will move them faster through the orchard so they're not eating down as far, they're not getting to those clovers, and just give them an extra. Sometimes it's as little as 3 weeks that the clovers need. When everything else is ready to graze or terminate, they need 3 more weeks to set that seed. Sometimes it can be longer. So yeah, just finding ways to give them a little more time, either grazing faster, holding the sheep back off them completely, or roller crimping.
Great. And thanks for mentioning that about, yeah, it's going to depend a lot about, in terms of how you want to how you want to put that seed out there. It depends on your ground condition. And someone had asked about, well, if you're broadcasting, are you doing anything to, you know, cover that seed up a little bit or incorporate it? And you know, plenty of growers do that broadcast, they do go through with something really light, just to basically float the seed, get a little bit of cover on it. And it sounds like that's what you guys used to do, Sean. I'm curious if there was any particular equipment that you found useful in the past for doing that.
We just used, in one trial, we just used our disc and did a shallow disking, maybe 2 inches, broadcast, and then ran over with a roller. That's kind of the tools we had on hand. Now that roller's a roller crimper, so.
Sounds good. Some people do use tines. Rollers are common. I've even heard of people going through with ATVs, dragging a piece of chain link fence, and that works too. Really anything to rough up that, that ground and just get the seed a little bit covered if that's something you need to do. Our next question here is about watering. There was some discussion about irrigation and getting that cover crop stand up. And Sean, you mentioned that you guys have set up overhead sprinklers, and there's a question about micro sprinklers specifically. Are micro sprinklers sufficient for getting cover crops started before the rains come?
If they have full coverage, then yes. Yeah.
Great. And let's see, let's jump to the next one. I also want to mention, there's quite a few questions here. We won't get to all of them. For any questions we don't answer, I'm going to bug these speakers to go ahead and send me written answers if they have them for these questions. We'll make sure we'll get to everyone either right now or via email. So there's a question around just wanting to hear a little bit more about the use of cover crops for beneficial insect habitat, not just pollinators, but also building up beneficials like pest predators. And do folks have any examples of actual reduction of pesticide use?
I'll tackle that a little bit. I would say one thing to consider if you're going to work on attracting insects to the cover crop, to make sure that you're not attracting particular plant pests. And there are certain ones. Of course, I'm not able to sort of drag it out of my brain now that I'm on the spot, but there are certain pests for tomatoes, like stink bugs, that may be attracted to certain species in a cover crop mix, so you would want to avoid those species. And then also thinking about the food sources that the insects that you're trying to attract, what they need, whether they need nectar and pollen, whether they're feasting on other insects. So you need to attract those insects first to then attract your parasitoids and your pest predators. So there's a lot to think about with insects. One example that I have, it's not a direct sort of insect-eating insect example, but cover crops keep dust down in orchards, which can reduce the need to spray for mites. And that's one of the sort of clear examples where cover crops can work in that sort of dual space of reducing pesticide use as well.
Thanks, Wendy. And I'm also going to use this question as an opportunity for a shameless plug here. CAF is actually starting a 3-year project next year looking at ecological pest management, and that's one of the questions we're actually going to be looking at. We'll be doing some research on biological control, specifically in walnuts, and we'll be looking at cover crops as well as releasing natural enemies. So stay tuned for more information on that question. And I know that also Sean earlier referred to, or Wendy actually referred to some earlier mixes that were shared through the BIOS program in the 1990s and early 2000s. That information is actually still available, and we can go ahead and send those mixes to you. That was another program looking at both the IPM benefits of cover crops as well as soil health, and a lot of lessons were learned there, including reductions in pesticides. And the other thing I'm just going to add quickly is that I've heard anecdotally from folks also on the topic of weed suppression, which we haven't talked about here, but that folks have been able to reduce their herbicide application through the use of cover crops in the alleys, just because they're able to basically choke out the weeds there. Let's take just a couple more questions here before we wrap up. So there was one question about two questions for Wendy here that should be pretty quick. One, does the eVeg guide tell you anything about whether or not that seed is organic or whether it's appropriate for organic orchards? And another question that came in was if there are any tools, including the Veg Guide tool, that allow you to select cover crop species that are tolerant of alkaline or saline soils. So people that are dealing with salt problems.
Yeah, good questions. So on the organic question, I would just say you would have to find a supplier for organic seed if that's a requirement for your system. I know that the organic system plans, if you check 3 suppliers and you cannot find an organic source, they will allow you to use non-organic seed in an organic system. So if you really, really want a certain species and you cannot find it anywhere organically, it still can be a component of your cover crop. You just have to document that you looked for it at least 3 different suppliers in an organic form. I don't have a catalog of which seeds are available in organic form or not. I think it's just a matter of sort of searching around among the suppliers, looking for what's available. Probably a lot more now than was 10 years ago for organic seed. The second question, remind me again, sorry. Oh, saline and alkali soils. Yeah, so if you go onto eVeg Guide, they do have soil constraints in there. So when you choose your site and you check that information of what soil it's using, you can check the pH, what it's using for a pH constraint, salinity, and make sure that you have that constraint clicked on, and it will help to narrow that choice list for species that should establish on those tougher soils.
Great, thank you, Wendy. We do have a number of additional questions here, but I do want to respect everyone's time, including our speakers. So I'm going to make sure those questions get answered via email, and I'll go ahead and include a link to those answers when we send out an email after the webinar. So just a reminder, we'll be sending an email probably tomorrow with a recording of this webinar, answers to questions we didn't get to, links to the NRCS Equip program, as well as the eVeg Guide, links to Billy Sink's program with Seeds for Bees, as well as a little bit of information on some of the work CAF has done on cover crops, including we're actually in the process of formatting a cover crop user's guide, which is designed to help folks really, basically take their goals and then help them walk them through the process of making a decision about what cover crop is right for you. And there's a lot of really great practical information there. So stay tuned for that. The last thing I will just add here is that, so CAF will be working with other organizations, particularly RCDs and also NCAD in the Sacramento Valley in the next year and a half or so, developing a technical assistance hub. And we're going to be working specifically in orchards, and there's going to be a lot more resources and events planned around cover crops and other practices for orchards. So stay tuned for that, and just want to thank everybody for joining. Special thanks to our speakers. You guys are a wealth of information, and I learn something new every time. And lastly, just, want to tell everyone out there to stay safe and sane during this crazy time we're living through in California. And please be in touch if you have questions, and we'll be sending out information via that email in the next couple days. Thanks so much.